people say that Bitcoin adoption is at 1% globally, and that's such bullshit, because if there's 8 billion people on the planet, that means 80 million people have like a vague relative understanding of this thing. We're not even close to that. And what they'll say is, yeah, but like proxied relationship through the ETF or through this security, and there's a wrapper on a wrapper on a wrapper on a wrapper, so it's technically 0.7% of their 401k has exposure to Bitcoin. I'm like, that's not adoption. Natalie, 80 million, like I don't even think we're at 8 million. I would say we're closer to 800,000, and that's being generous.
Every cycle, investors obsess over price targets, ETF, inflows, Fed meetings, and market predictions. But according to Jack Mallers, those conversations are missing the bigger picture. The common claim that Bitcoin has already reached 1% global adoption sounds impressive on paper. Yet when you stop and think about what true adoption actually means, not passive exposure through an ETF, not a retirement fund allocation made by a portfolio manager, but genuine understanding of why Bitcoin exists and why it matters, the numbers start to look astonishingly small. Mallers argues that we may still be so early that even the most optimistic adoption estimates are wildly inflated. In his view, the people who truly understand money, understand Bitcoin's role in the financial system, and consciously choose it as a savings technology could number in the hundreds of thousands rather than the tens of millions. If he's right, then Bitcoin's story is nowhere near its conclusion. It may still be in the earliest chapter, and that's what makes the rest of this conversation so important, because Mallers doesn't just explain why he believes Bitcoin adoption is far lower than most people think. He also breaks down why the last few years may not have been a true Bitcoin bull market at all, how restrictive monetary policy has shaped the market, why future liquidity could become a massive catalyst, and what real adoption actually looks like when measured over the long term. Before we jump in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you never miss our future market breakdowns. Also, let me know in the comments, how many people do you think truly understand Bitcoin today? Is it millions, hundreds of thousands, or even fewer? Now let's hear what Jack Mallers had to say.
And you said last year in 2025, you don't think that was like a real bull run. Now we're in a bear market. When do you think things will recover, and are we due for maybe a way better bull run than we had the last time around?
Yeah, I don't. So, I mean, Bitcoin did not make new highs against gold. It did not make new highs. I mean, I view looking at the world in fiat is like wearing drunk goggles. It's very distorting of reality. You know, like don't drink, drive, don't save in fiat and drive. That's what I would, because you're like, oh man, what lane am I in? So yes, in dollar terms, did Bitcoin make new all-time highs? Sure. But measured in things that store value better, it did not. And I think the reasons for that, you know, I love all the macro analysts as much as the next guy, but I'm not nearly as smart as all these folks. So I think of it much simpler. Monetary policy has been immensely restrictive since 2021. Rates have remained elevated because inflation has been stickier and more persistent than people thought. And the Fed's balance sheet has shrunk tremendously. And we saw some liquidity injected into the system as a result of Silicon Valley Bank failing, but that was this reverse repo, Janet Yellen engineering. And so, I mean, when the Fed's balance sheet shrinks as much as it did, and rates, the fastest rate hike we've ever seen, and it's persisted for as long as it's had because inflation is not willing to die. It makes sense to me that the last like real bull market, was that COVID 2021. And so I think, you know, Bitcoin is some combination of technology plus fiat liquidity. You know, people say, well, is it a trade like a tech stock or a trade like gold? Well, you know, I think it's a hybrid, and it deserves that hybrid because it is disruptive technology. It is software that solved a new problem, that's creating new markets and disintermediating existing ones. And so that it is a technology, but it also is priced on future expectations of fiat liquidity. If the Fed, there's now rumors that the Fed might hike rates today, well, Bitcoin started to weaken. If the Fed all of a sudden cuts 300 basis points, I think Bitcoin's going to hit 100K in a week. So it is both. And so I think that we'll reach new, true, real all-time highs in the coming years, because I expect the expectation of new fiat liquidity and money printing and credit to greatly grow. And I think Bitcoin's technology is more of a methodical story. The amount of addresses, the amount of active balances, the amount of new businesses that are using it will continue to disrupt as well. If you're here just to, sorry if this is ruthless or borderline offensive, but if you're here for me to cradle you and take the pacifier out of your mouth and hand you the most performing thing, guys, there's no such thing. There's no free lunch. Yeah, you coulda, woulda, shoulda. So would I. I coulda, woulda, shoulda done something different at 21. I coulda, woulda, shoulda not made the merchant announcements I did in 2022. I coulda, woulda, shoulda. But that's not how life works, and I didn't. The point is, we have a monetary asset that's free enough to tell us the truth that can change the world because the world can't change it. It is the last honest signal that we get with like the raw and real world. It's made me a better man. It's made the world a better place. And it has historically been the best performing thing. Now, over what time and duration? I tell my buddies in high school that we're scared of the volatility and this. I say, guys, I told you to buy it here. It's now here. Because it didn't go in a straight line, you can get mad at me? Who cares that it went like that? Doesn't matter. So yes, could you have invested in NVIDIA instead of Bitcoin? But then Bitcoin, if you in hindsight could have went from Bitcoin, but then NVIDIA for this time, but then back to Bitcoin, and then you're right. You would have been like God amongst men. And if that's what you hold yourself accountable to, then God bless you. You're never going to be happy. I would touch grass, lift some heavy things, eat a steak, and hang out with people you love. You're just never, what are we doing? So I assume the frustration comes from a place of, consumer sentiment is all-time lows.
Yeah.
This K-shaped economy thing is real. Mm-hmm. You're seeing businesses now are very vocal with central planners and the Fed saying you have to raise rates and fight inflation because our customers are too poor to shop and people are in a significant amount of pain. And it's very difficult to understand whose fault that is and to internalize that. And so is it Bitcoin's fault? If you want it to be Bitcoin's fault, it's Bitcoin's fault. But what is Bitcoin? It is a guaranteed monetary policy, guaranteed supply, which I expect over the long term to be the safest way to protect the work you've already done and save for the life that's ahead of you.
Maller's argument cuts against much of the mainstream narrative surrounding Bitcoin. While many investors focus exclusively on price charts measured in dollars, he believes that perspective can be misleading. From his standpoint, Bitcoin's performance must be viewed within the broader context of monetary policy, liquidity conditions, and its evolution as both a technology platform and a monetary asset. If future liquidity expansion arrives as he expects, Bitcoin's next chapter could look very different from the one investors experienced over the last several years. But even if liquidity becomes the fuel, adoption remains the engine. And this is where Mallers delivers perhaps his most controversial takeaway. He argues that most people dramatically overestimate how far Bitcoin adoption has progressed. In fact, he believes we're still operating at a fraction of what many investors imagine. Here's how he explains it.
People say that Bitcoin adoption is at 1% globally, and that's such bullshit because if there's 8 billion people on the planet, that means 80 million people have like a vague relative understanding of this thing. We're not even close to that. And what they'll say is, yeah, but like proxied relationship through the ETF or through this security, and there's a wrapper on a wrapper on a wrapper on a wrapper, so it's technically 0.7% of their 401k has exposure to Bitcoin. I'm like, that's not adoption. Who thinks that's reasonably adoption? On what planet is that adoption? Because as soon as some money manager or some fund manager or some portfolio manager flips a switch the other way because someone else got elected president or whatever, then they're unadopted. That doesn't make any sense. Like, you can't unadopt me from Bitcoin. Like, I get it. Now, whether I want to one day sell it or whatever, that's different, but I understand it. And so I would say the people that like have a vague relative understanding of like what is money and like why does this thing exist and like how is it different than the dollar? Natalie, 80 million, like I don't even think we're at 8 million. I would say we're closer to 800,000, and that's being generous. And so I would say then we're like a basis point of what I would consider to be adoption.
Do you think we've made a lot of progress in the short amount of time Bitcoin has existed, or do you feel like we're really behind? Like more people should be understanding? Like, how do we reach those people? Because you're saying, I mean, like the total addressable market, 8 billion.
We've made an immense amount of progress, and this is a what KPI, what key performance indicator matters. Well, people will say things like, I'm not in it for the price, I'm in it for the technology. Get the out of here. The price is the only thing that matters. It's the only metric that matters. And what I mean by that is Bitcoin is actively being monetized by more and more people. And how can I track that? How much? So going back to what I said earlier, how much of when I wake up on a given day and I say, you know what, the time, energy, effort, and labor that I need to save, I'm going to pick that one, the Bitcoin one, not the dollar, not a treasury, not a basket of equity index. I'm going to pick the Bitcoin one. That's me making a conscious decision to store my cash balances in my human labor and wealth I've created in Bitcoin, and that's reflected in the price. And so when the price goes up, it is a reflection of adoption, of people at the margins deciding, I'm going to pick this one. And so the price is the only KPI that matters. And so the fact that Bitcoin now is the fact that a basis point of people have a vague understanding of money and like why Bitcoin is different and like can appreciate and may even have a chance at making that decision in the first place. Sure, but $1 trillion asset, that KPI means we've made a lot of progress. Because sure, maybe the amount of people that are making these decisions is small relative to the size, but the amount of wealth making that decision, you see that there's difference. Now that goes to show the wealth disparity throughout the world is that the 8 billion people don't split the wealth evenly, right. Unfortunately. And so there's some tail there where like you might get to 1% global adoption and Bitcoin might be a $25 trillion asset. What does that mean? And is it benefiting everyone? Is this innovation and how it's liberating and how free it is that going to be felt equally? Now, these are much more complicated philosophical questions, but I don't want people thinking that we're not making progress but when you go back to, do I want to be the king of Wall Street and on the cover of magazines and leading public companies? No, I don't need that for me. I actually am okay with, I actually think that there's a lot of work to do in getting that 1 basis point to 2 basis points because Coinbase isn't making what is money videos, isn't making Austrian theory videos. And the amount of wealth that will continue to monetize Bitcoin is a separate metric. And I think we've made an ungodly amount of progress.
One of the most fascinating aspects of Maller's thesis is that it completely reframes the way investors think about Bitcoin's maturity. Most markets become less exciting as they grow larger because the biggest gains have already been captured. But Bitcoin may be unique. If true adoption is still measured in basis points rather than percentages, then the market may be much earlier in its development than conventional wisdom suggests. His argument also highlights an important distinction between exposure and understanding. Owning a Bitcoin-related asset through a retirement account is not necessarily the same as consciously choosing Bitcoin as a store of value. Real adoption happens when individuals understand the problem Bitcoin solves and voluntarily decide to allocate their savings accordingly. That process takes time, education, and experience. But history shows that transformative technologies often spend years appearing insignificant before suddenly becoming impossible to ignore. At the same time, Mahler's isn't dismissing the progress Bitcoin has already made. A $1 trillion asset class doesn't emerge by accident. Institutional participation, growing infrastructure, increasing global awareness, and expanding liquidity have all contributed to Bitcoin's rise. The question isn't whether progress has occurred. The question is how much progress remains ahead, and according to Mahler's, the answer could be far more than most investors realize. Whether you agree with his estimates or not, the broader takeaway is difficult to ignore. If Bitcoin continues attracting capital while gradually converting more people from passive observers into active participants, the long-term opportunity may still be enormous. Not because everyone suddenly buys Bitcoin tomorrow, but because adoption is a process that unfolds one person, one family, one business, and one institution at a time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who follows Bitcoin and macro investing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.